let's begin. Dr. Julie Taylor, would you like to be the first one? We can follow the order that, yes? Okay.
Yep, that'll work. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Julie Taylor is a professor in the Department of Communication and Media with expertise in organizational policy and gender communication. She serves as the co-founder and director of the Speaking Center at Jack Brown College and as a member of the faculty team for our Liberal Studies program. Her research is primarily situated in exploring communication in the disciplines, policy enactment, and organizational responses, and more specifically, human trafficking. Okay, whenever you're ready, Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do I have sharing? Okay. Okay, of course, I promise I tested this, but now it's not. Let's see, from beginning. There we go. Here we are. All right, everyone. Thank you. So, how many of you know what the speed limit is on the local freeways? Right? You may not know. Some of you may guess. This morning when I was on the freeway, I was going, I don't know, 65, 75. I can do sort of whatever I want because that seems to be the policy in California. Go with the flow of traffic, they say, or I don't know, I was running late, or if I go just 5 over, it's okay. Well, in case that none of you have ever seen the speed limit, it is 65. And it doesn't say 65 unless you feel like going 75. It says 65 miles an hour. And so what we have here is this example of policy as written, which is the speed limit sign, and policy as practice, so how people might choose to interpret that. And so this is sort of a fun example to get our minds around what we're going to talk about today, and really this difference and the important implications of policy as practice versus policy as written. And so I'm going to talk about policy communications. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview on what is policy communication, but what I have decided to do today is highlight some of the research that I've done, but really highlight the applied context. So I've been able to work with nonprofit organizations, building out their curricular models and activities online, and also working with different nursing organizations, educational programs to help people understand how is human trafficking happening in Southern California, and specifically how can nurses help with what's going on. So there we are. Okay, so my research areas are organizational communication, policy communication, gender communication, and of course, specifically looking at human trafficking. So just for the beginning, looking at policy communication really concerns the communicative elements and processes that create, implement, interpret, and evaluate policies of any type. So it's really situated in communication. How does communication help all of these pieces come together? And this was from a study that Dr. Canary and I did in 2017. In the 2020, we looked at over 1,000 articles to see how are people examining policy communication. So how are people using it? What contexts are they exploring it within? And some of the bigger contexts that we identified that people are looking at environmental policies, educational policies, of course, as we all know now, diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, work-life balance, and also healthcare. So specifically then, this study looks at healthcare and human trafficking and enacting policy communication. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore these tensions between policy as written and policy as practice and look at potential opportunities for policy practice and/or potential revision. Okay, so first we're going to start off looking at different policies, different federal guidelines. And so in order to understand the current landscape, I want to give a brief overview on maybe you've never really thought about human trafficking policy. And again, it's a little bit of a heavy topic, but I'm trying to highlight really sticking more to policy. But what are the federal guidelines and what are the state guidelines? And so the cool thing about policy is that policies help us understand how people are socially constructing problems. So what do people understand about problems and how are they writing it into existence, in other words? And so we have this layering of federal policies, then with state guidelines. And so to help us get there, we think about the organizing consequences of public policies. So in this sense, Public policies are collections of texts, practices, and decisions articulated by an institutional system to solve problems involving people in society. And so oftentimes we lean on policy and we say, well, we can't do that because policy said, or the policy says. And so we give it a lot of power, but how it gets power is through how we create it and implement it and enact it. So the TVPA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, was written in 2000. So before 2000, there wasn't a policy or a definition around what human trafficking is. So we had to come up with, here's what it is and here's how we're defining it. So this is an example of policy as written. So in 2000, the federal government said, here is what trafficking looks like. So for everyone who hasn't read this before, no problem, here I have it for you. They have, in order to be able to identify a situation as human trafficking, you have to be able to say that this is the act, this is the means, and this is the purpose of the situation. So they have the act as recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power or vulnerability, or giving payments or benefits to a person in control of the victim, and the purpose for exploitation, which includes the exploiting of prostitution, which is going to become important later, other sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, and similar practices, and the removal of organs. So people who are writing this policy are like, excellent, great, we did it. We have encompassed all of the things that might happen in trafficking. This is going to be a slam dunk if ever there's a situation of trafficking. Well, idealistic, because what we know is that it's much more challenging to prove. So for instance, when I was doing some research and working with victims, there was a woman who had been trafficked by her mother since she was 5. And it wasn't until she was 30 that she said, I, like, I just sort of always thought like this was normal. This was what was happening. And so she has this policy as lived versus as practiced example. And so she said she was my mom. So if people were to ask her, are you in a situation of being trafficked? She's like, I don't think so, right? Like, this is my mom. This is how we live. This is how we make money. And so really in this sense, situations are more complicated, right? Our policies expect situations to be very black and white. And that's just really not how we live, how situations are enacted. So thinking about this inherent tension, right? So we can have tension, or sorry, inherent process of policies is that policies are reactive. So we have to understand situations. Things have to go wrong. So you could think about your syllabi, for instance. You might create a new policy at the end of the semester based on something that happened in the classroom, or someone turned in something late and now you have a late policy. So that's an example of reactive policy processes and policy documents, policy writing. So policy as written, again, is often an attempt to define or redefine situations, but we can only define and redefine through understanding the situations as they're being lived and experienced. So the next slides, I'm going to show you this attempt to define and understand policy processes through both federal and state policies. And this is not exhaustive. It's not an exhaustive list of all of the policies, but just to show you the vast amount of policies that exist. So here's our federal policies. Here's our California policies. And again, that's a fast list because you don't need to know them all, but just need to understand there's a lot. There's a lot of revision going on. So if it seems so black and white and so easy to say the act, the means, and the purpose, it's really not. So what we notice in looking at all of these examples is there's this inherent tension that exists from not only construction, but to implementation. So considering specifically that human trafficking wasn't even in our vernacular, wasn't even in our codes, our criminal codes until 2000, there had to have been a policy that existed prior to that. That policy in terms of sex for sale is prostitution. So when I was working with a law enforcement agent, he said, when I book somebody for sex for sale, the only option I have in my drop down list on for prostitution, and then I have to try to make a case outside of that if I believe this is a situation of human trafficking, which gives preference to that first policy. So in essence, prostitution is the first option in the decision matrix, and if not, then then. So for instance, thinking age, thinking situation, thinking was this person transported? And so it becomes incumbent upon the person who is enacting the policy to make the case. Well, that is also complicated. So I took one of those policies and I tried to break it down. So, like, how do we see this really playing out? So, let's say we have prostitution, right? That's the a priori, the first policy that we have existing. In order for someone to be charged with prostitution, they either are going to be buying sex, brokering sex, or selling sex. Okay, so how does that happen? Well, through patronizing or soliciting for buying, exploiting or trafficking for brokering, or oops, prostitution for selling sex. That's a that's a tension, that's a struggle. So you mean to tell me that prostitution only exists here under selling sex when we're saying, oh, here's where prostitution is all these things. Oh no, it's only selling sex. So here's where we're going to see a really interesting shift. So this is our policy as it's written. When we look at our policy as it's practiced, so how people are enacting, how people are using the policy, how people are implementing, how they understand the policy, watch what happens to the selling sex category that's just this one line here. We have it becomes a lot of different ways of understanding sex for sale. In fact, that's predominantly where arrests are coming from, where resources are attempting to be allocated. The other challenge that we have, based on those tensions that we were just talking about, is that trafficking exists underneath prostitution in the way that we're understanding it. So we see inherent in the policy as it's written through how we're practicing it, we're actually creating these tensions. Another example is a study, or another thing to think about in terms of policy construction is a study that we did from 2018. And what we looked at is the Trafficking in Persons report. So the Trafficking in Persons report, it is essentially a grading system. It says, we have the TVPA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Here's how everybody's doing with it. And for the first 10 years, the United States actually didn't write themselves into the policy. So a lot of when human trafficking was first brought into our vernacular, people said, "Oh, trafficking, it doesn't happen here. It's not in the United States. It's everywhere else." Not true. But year 10, we were like, oh, guess what? It actually does happen here. That's a problem. But the important finding from this problem is the fact that authorship matters. Authorship matters because of things like the perspective that people are coming from. What lived experiences do people have? And who has access to write policy, create policy, and or change policies? So in this sense, policies are much more than documents. They represent a combination of assumptions, arguments, texts, behaviors, outcomes that serve to construct knowledge, count as justification for decisions, and both constrain and enable action. And then, most importantly, from our study of 2020, we found that engaging multiple stakeholders is something that is not often done, but something that should be done. And so, one of those multiple stakeholders, especially looking at in Southern California is, oh, sorry. Yes, I'm going to go to this one. It's especially looking in Southern California, is a study found that 87% of sex trafficking victims sought treatment within the healthcare system while in captivity, but were neither identified nor offered assistance from healthcare professionals. That's nearly 90% of people who are trafficked. And so this is a really great opportunity for healthcare professionals to help people who are in these situations before law enforcement has to sort of make their decision matrix. So, as a healthcare professional, every opportunity becomes data. So, what does that look like? We have an example of an initial communicative moment. So the victim says, I didn't tell the nurse about my situation because the man was like around there. So we couldn't talk about the situation. He was outside. He would walk in the hallway where we were at. We would try to find a way to see if he tried to find a way to see if he could listen in. And so just sort of being aware of the surroundings of the person that people are coming in with. Another example is as observing body language. So the victim says, I think the doctor can tell, the body language. They see the difference I think my boss can tell them that I'm her relative, but you could tell the difference between they dress, how they dress, the way they act. It's very, very different. Most trafficking victims is scared, nervous, very nervous, very scared, and you can see it in their eyes and in their face. And so in this example, we see that people are thinking, people are paying attention, right? Our nurses are paying attention. This might be an opportunity for me to get out of this situation. Another example is looking at maybe all the different exams and findings and how that could lead to identifying a situation of trafficking. So, for instance, for dermatology, burns, bites, scratches, certain tattoos indicate um, belonging to certain gangs, especially in Southern California. And so, just understanding the situation that people are in and how that might lead to understanding this is a situation of trafficking and more serious than just coming in for a routine appointment. So then how do we change some of our policies in practice? Thinking about screenings and physical examinations. So separating a patient from anyone who's accompanying them, using a translator or translating phone service if there's a language barrier, and asking the patient if they prefer like either a male or female provider. Also, making sure that at every appointment, nurses are asking these questions. Tell me about your living situation. Has anyone ever asked you to have sex in exchange for money, food, shelter, or other items? Has anyone ever threatened violence if you attempted to leave? Has anyone ever threatened your family if you attempted to leave? And so these are more nuanced questions rather than just saying, are you in a situation of trafficking? It allows us to get at that practiced experience through the policy as written. So then, um, what we know about, if we look at this communication a centered approach to policy, so policy is communicative, it should be iterative, bi-directional. If we look specifically at policy enactment, it becomes this. So, orientation, the process is basic information dissemination. In human trafficking, that looks like including human trafficking, like understanding the situation. It includes exploitation, which means poor working conditions, lack of agency, repeated violence. Amplification, so including multiple stakeholders. So when you have someone who comes in, and maybe if a healthcare professional identifies someone, do you have a robust set of resources and people you can go to for resources? Implementation is constructing meaning in action. So questions like, should we revisit intake processes? Will there be interpreters available? And then thinking about integration, which is cross context meaning construction. So pulling in external resources or policy experts and thinking through revisions. So specifically then, again, for healthcare, um, we know that there's about 90% of people that we're not meeting and we could be meeting. So things that they could do is we could train healthcare professionals, mitigate language barriers, interview or examine all patients privately at some point and insist that that be done. Carefully observe body language and communication of patients and who accompanies them. So in this sense, the promise of a better life is about someone recognizing a situation and helping. And as Elizabeth Dole reminds us, that the best public policy is made when you are listening to people who are going to be impacted. And this is our essentially our role in engaging multiplicity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Fascinating research and very valuable, very important. Our next presenter is Professor Taylor Moon Castagnari. She's a contemporary artist and professor of art and design. Her primary mediums are animation, installation, and digital illustration. Her work has been displayed in many places, such as the National Art Center in Tokyo and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Santa Barbara, among others. She has garnered solo exhibitions at places like the Riverside Art Museum and has upcoming solo shows at the Fullerton Museum Center and the Bellefonte Art Museum in Pennsylvania. Recently, she took part in an artistic residency at the Museum of Nepali Art in the Patan Museum, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Over to you, Professor Moon Castagnari, whenever you're ready.
Hello, thank you so much everybody for having me. I'm going to share my screen and share about a little bit of the work I've been partaking in the past 4 years since my since joining this university. So since being here, I've had 5 solo exhibits, which include the Riverside Art Museum, the Museum of Nepali Art, the Robert and Frances Fullerton Museum of Art here on campus, and the Grange Insurance Center. And in this upcoming year alone, I have 2 upcoming exhibits at the Fullerton Museum Center in Fullerton, California, and the Bellefonte Art Museum in Pennsylvania, which I'll mostly be focusing on today. I've also had 19 group exhibits since 2022. I'm not going to read through all of these, but several key ones include currently my work is up at the National Art Center Tokyo and the North Museum in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the Museum and Cultural Center. I just received the work back from, so those are a couple of the most recent, and the Anne Marie Sculpture Garden and Art Center, which is a Smithsonian affiliate. And here are a couple of their logos in case any of them bring back any memories. Recently, I also partook in 2 artistic residencies, both at the Torrance Art Museum and the Museum of Nepali Art. And I would say that a crux of my practice is ensuring that I integrate multiple mediums in order to really create a world building and story telling setting. I like to immerse the viewer so that there are multiple components that they can engage with and that there's a little bit of something for everybody. Each medium has its own story to tell. So in my residency at the Torrance Art Museum, I constructed caves out of plaster and used metaphor as the primary vehicle for storytelling, getting viewers to reposition themselves by considering like qualities between seemingly dissimilar things. So for example, I created animation and plaster cast hands showing how touch can resemble the stalagmites of a cave, and how the oils on one's skin can actually staunch cave structures. So this idea of the stalagmites resembling splayed fingers, the fingers of the cave growing towards one another, stalagmites and stalactites converging to form columnar structures, and kind of creating this both visual metaphor and a poetic metaphor that was narrated and spoken within the animation that became a kind of guiding force or tempo. Other similar practices include my solo exhibit at the Riverside Art Museum. This exhibit called The Balancing Act was shown both at the Sassy Museum of Art and the Riverside Museum of Art, and took on different takes as they kind of adapted over time. Here you can see again how multimedia format is very important to my practice, in that you have digital illustration printed on vinyl and mounted on acrylic, printed on metal as well. How my digital illustrations can also be printed on flags and banners and so forth, as well as like merchandise that were kind of positioned to leave cues as to the space that the museum goer is inhabiting. So for example, I designed the banner up at the top, the cover text for the water bottle, and the cover text for the notebook in the space, as well as all of the illustrations that you see throughout. One, I think it's pivotal to show my digital illustration students the different formats and mediums their work can take on, how it doesn't need to just live on a screen. But 2, also recreating a cheerleading locker room space, harkening back to the idea that of likening or juxtaposing 2 seemingly dissimilar things. In this exhibit, I was exploring how cheerleading could be a metaphor for psychology and neurobiology, and how it could be used as a means to bridge topics of mental health. How the cheerleaders of a team are all individuals that function as a unit, and how the neurons in our brain are often these little tumbling gymnasts that kind of fire off at different rates, but each have their own function and convey messages, and how the messages of peppiness and excitement, such as like dopamine, can coincide with the peppiness of a cheerleader. So community practice is very important to my work. During this exhibit, aside from creating multi-format media that would either be used for printing the exhibit handouts and tickets, as well as postcards, I also designed the text and promotion for artist talks, for street side banners that had a large visible presence in the area, as well as community-based events that brought foot traffic into the museum. So as you can see here, I coordinated cheerleading bow making days and coordinated activities that would coincide and cause deeper engagement with audience members, while also making it accessible to all audience ages. Because understanding that mental health and neurobiology and talking about pyramidal neurons or cognitive flexibility might not be as accessible to younger audiences, but thinking about how I can still have a positive impact through the exhibit. So with exhibit design comes manifold steps to ensure that it goes off smoothly and looks professional, which includes creating wall text and also leading school group tours and talking about the work and being able to talk about it to different audience ages. This is an image from my exhibit, Artificial Modernity, which is a take on a modern day take on natural history. It was shown at the Grange Insurance Center and looks at how technological mediation can affect our relationship to animals, specifically birds. And in preparation for that exhibit, I created an entire 3D model for how the work would look like positioned in the space, how far apart the wall text would be, and the types of work. So that way, when you're creating a proposal, the reviewers can truly visualize how your work would look and fit within their space. So with upcoming exhibits I have at the Fullerton Museum Center, again, I'm diving into metaphor and looking at the correlation between dreams and liminal spaces. Liminal spaces are these sorts of transitional everyday spaces that aren't necessarily destinations in and of themselves, but are places that can really be a launch pad for imagination and reflection. I have been practicing more photography in my recent work and have been incorporating like kind of aerial acrobatics, using the hammock as like a metaphor for the veil between reality and the dreamscape, and also kind of like the blanket or tether between the two environments. So this work has been shown locally at the Huntington Beach Art Center, at Museum and Cultural Center, and will receive the a sole exhibit at the Fullerton Museum Center. To make this work more immersive, I'll be creating a cloudscape ceiling, creating 3D models of everyday environments such as like gas stations, and having these prints on metal throughout the space. For my upcoming solo exhibit at the Bellefonte Art Museum, I'll be exploring themes of identity, multiculturalism, immigration, and belonging. That will occur from May to June of 2026. And that is a sneak preview of one of the works that will be included in the exhibit. How I hear about these opportunities is usually through calls for art located on Instagram or postings on their actual websites themselves, and I receive a floor plan, and I begin mapping out down to the inch how my work would look and feel within the space. I want it to breathe. I want it to read chronologically as the viewer walks through the space as a story. And so here's an example of how I tackle the floor plan. I place the proposed works down to scale within the space, account for the gaps and the wall size, and then account for title text and wall text explaining each work. Here, as I mentioned, for 3D modeling, I currently am 3D printing this gas station, and we'll be combining mediums of acrylic painting with the 3D model and then combining it with the photographs that I've shown earlier. This is a snippet of how this work looked within the Huntington Beach Art Center, and it's critically looking at the this liminal space landscape of like doctor's offices. I also looked at grocery stores, airports, and other similar backdrops. These both works, which include a bus stop and a shopping mall, were featured at the Anne Marie Sculpture Garden and Art Center, which is a Smithsonian affiliate. And with many of these exhibits are published associative catalogs. So not only is the work seen in person to whatever museum goers visit, but also has a permanent place with publications that coincide with the exhibit. This work, as I mentioned, was also just shown at Museum and Cultural Arts Center, and was associated with the Anaheim Art Association. And these are part of juried shows in which a panel of artist reviewers select works from various submissions to be included within a specific exhibit based on like merit or adherence to a specific theme. So to talk a little bit more and kind of end with my work that will be shown at the Bellefonte Art Museum, I'm looking at my Korean identity and trying to show how, as a second generation immigrant, how there's a lot of cultural disconnect I sometimes feel with being from a multi-ethnic household. So not understanding rudimentary Korean, I often feel like I'm at the most basic level of communication or language knowledge. And so this work showcases that where I'm in a elementary school classroom learning Korean. And this work is shown currently at the National Art Center, Tokyo. These works in general too were shown at the Southgate Art Museum and at the Sika Museum. And the great thing about this specific series was that I got to travel to Korea to further investigate some of the themes in the work, as well as bring several of the directors from the Sika Museum in Korea out to California, as it was a traveling exhibit that one came to our Dutton Gallery at CSUSB and then traveled to the Sika Museum or Sejong Institute of Contemporary Art in Gimpo, Korea. These works use play and imagination as an act of like resistance, resilience, and preservation, thinking about how the pressures to assimilate or to fully embrace another culture, you often are pushed to grow up much quicker than one would otherwise have to. And looking at the embracing one's culture and embracing youth and play against the backdrop of a bustling and diverse urban landscape such as Los Angeles. So works from these exhibits were shown at the Mexican Art Museum in Austin, Texas, and at the museum in Pomona as well, and at the Kyongsung University Art Gallery. So those are a couple of the works that I will have as solo exhibits that I'm excited to further develop out in the coming days. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Castagnari. It's been amazing. You're so incredibly productive, you know? Wow, it's impressive. Congrats. Our third presenter is Roberto Oregel. Professor Oregel is an independent filmmaker and associate professor of communication and media. For more than 20 years, he has been writing, directing, and producing films that explore, that explore art, identity, and social issues affecting underrepresented communities. Most recently, he completed and screened Foxtrot Operation Reunification, a documentary about Desert Storm veterans, at festivals across the United States. His newest film, Lejanías y Nostalgia, The Art of Alfredo de Batuc, will premiere at CSUSB on November 20th. Whenever you're ready, Professor Oregel.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this discussion. I really appreciate the fact that we could share our creative work. Let me talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk about this project that basically, I'm in the process of finishing up, Lejanías y Nostalgia. It's been a journey. It feels amazing to be here presenting it and finally saying that this film is finally locked. You know, and documentaries tend to go long. You don't know exactly how long it's going to take, but usually documentaries could go quite long. So I'm really honored to be able to share this. We are going to be screening this film on campus November 20th at SMSU Theater. So you are cordially invited to come and see Lejanías y Nostalgia, the art of Alfredo de Batuc. I just want to show you a little bit of background on how I got here to do this project and what interests me in his artwork, and just a little bit of background. How this project began is basically, I've been documenting artists for many years. I'm very interested in highlighting artists because they work so hard, they dedicate their life, their soul to art, like Taylor is, you know, and her art. So one of my first projects that I did was working on Gronk's Tormenta, a method. This was a documentary with renowned artist Gronk, who was a neighbor of mine for many years in downtown LA. And I thought his work was very powerful. He is a significant artist within the landscape of the art world, really, and specifically within the Latino community. He is a very strong figure in the art world. After Gronk's Tormenta, I ended up working with renowned muralist Eloy Torres. Eloy Torres is a amazing muralist. He's been working as a muralist for many years. Did amazing art or murals throughout LA, specifically at the Hollywood High School, which he has an amazing mural of various characters, personalities within the cinema world, as well as Latino actors, etc. So let me show you just a little clip of Eloy Take Two, and this is what was my one of the significant projects that I've done in this realm. So let me find, here it is. All right, this is Eloy Take Two.
Painting is one of those things that it's a love-hate thing for me. I mean, very rarely does it happen where I can do a painting from start to finish and not have a lot of drama with it.
We've made some iconic images that that define really the visual face of LA, that he's part of LA.
I think he captures LA in a way that no one else really ever has.
Eloy Torres, I didn't know about him before today, but I bought one of his pieces.
I love that mural, and it was so calm.
It's a total moment of letting go.
Maybe I haven't accomplished what I set out to do with the way I'm working yet, but the time is coming. To loosen up quite a bit.
You've got this quirkiness, without question, and it's a quirkiness that has evolved.
You can see not only the external features of an individual, but you can see the soul, you can see the inner self. Eloy allows me to look at his painting and allow my own imagination to.
I could draw. And so that got me attention. It got me, got me some recognition with my classmates.
He has no idea of, his audience or how he affects people. Maybe Eloy was on pot. Maybe what do you think his artwork would be?
Hey, it works for some people. I don't know if it will really. I'm like, oh, where's my brush?
Yeah.
Name is Eloy Torres. Eloy Torres.
There he is.
Hey, Eloy. Was that Eloy Torres? I was wondering what he looked like.
All right, that's a short clip of Eloy take two. Let me continue with the presentation. In 2016, I began a discussion about furthering on this project, this idea of creating more documentaries highlighting artists. And I began the discussion with art historian Charlene Villaseñor Black, who is a professor at UCLA, and my good friend Sergio Vasquez, who is also an amazing artist. So I wanted to think about doing like a series of 10 different artists throughout the community, and there would be shorts. That was the concept, that was the idea. Following that discussion, I ended up meeting, and discussing this topic was with Alfredo de Batuc. Alfredo de Batuc, I've known since the early 1990s when I was living in downtown LA amongst all these artists and going to all these galleries and art studios, etc. And in the early 1990s, I ended up meeting Alfredo. And when I first initially went to his studio, I was amazed by his power and creative artwork that he was showing in his masterpiece works. So after Eloy Take Two, I just thought I have to do something on Alfredo de Batuc. And Alfredo had just was slowly recovering from neurological disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And he was very much paralyzed for a couple of years, and he was just slowly recovering. And so when I ended up talking to Alfredo, I said, I want to do a documentary on you. We agreed to do it, and I started filming in the last weeks of 2016. This image right here that we see is at MacArthur Park. This was like the first meeting, first sort of days, first weeks of filming, and he was kind of struggling. He had his walker and stuff like that, and so he could only work a certain amount of time that we could film him. Here's again Alfredo de Batuc, at MacArthur Park. The first weeks, I ended up working with fellow students of mine from fellow students who were also filmmakers. Jose Espinosa, where you see here, he had just bought his Steadicam rig. And he basically hit me up. He says, Professor Oregel, I'd like to test my Steadicam. I'd like to, and I said, you know, you're calling me at the right time. I'm about to start a film on artist Alfredo de Batuc. So he ended up joining us, and we ended up filming at the San Gabriel Mission in Hollywood at the Hollywood Mural, and it was a great pleasure to have him working with me along with this project, and another student, Kaveh Aflakian. Here's one of production stills working on in the Hollywood Hills, the Hollywood mural, Dolores del Rio. We're setting up the camera and setting up some shots. This is the mural that we were shooting in front of. We were going to try to capture a little bit of the history of the mural and how it came about, etc. And it was a big interview that I did with Alfredo de Batuc right here in this spot. And consequently, after Jose Espinosa worked on our project, he went on and continued to work on with the Steadicam rig, and now he's in amazing Hollywood production. So I'm very happy and proud of our student Jose Espinosa. Here's another shot of, this is the time where Alfredo was working in a small studio close to Compton, central LA. And he had a very tiny studio, and he could barely sort of work. And he was working really small paintings mostly. And here's a sample of his work right here. So let me show you just a few clips of the work of the film, so you could see. Hold on, let me see. Are you able to see? Hold on, right here. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
A mí me gusta el arte. Me gusta el arte y voy a mirar las galerías a Los Ángeles y aquí y por ahí lo miré usted. Pero estaba un poco más joven. Ah, claro, pero ya tiene más experiencia, ¿verdad? Y trae otra servilleta para dibujar algo. Mira.
I just think of him as a really rare human being.
When you see it, you know it's de Batuc. Especially this whole series about the city hall. And about the moon.
Yo no tengo ese don. Ese es un don de Dios que les da.
Very, very intellectual.
There was something always about it that you know it was Alfredo's work.
Si le pido una firma, me da la forma. Claro. Y mira, el artista dejó salir su luz.
He's got a way about him that, you know, it's just him. There's no other de Batuc.
Let me jump over to the second clip really quick. And I just have two more video clips that I want to show, just to demonstrate his artwork.
The imagination is more alive in the Mexican psyche outside of Mexico than reality is. You know, who cares about reality when you have that imagination of the possibility of what Mexico is and what it means, what it was and what it will be.
I have not tried to make myself fit into any classification. I do what I'm doing, and I'm doing representational work. And so there it is.
Even though he's working in a figural language, he resists real life or representing sort of what we would think of as real life. This is an art that's very poetic, that's very imaginative, that seems to draw from the unconscious, that is not easy to read.
You know, my intention is basically to do something that pleases me. And I think that if something pleases me, it might please somebody else.
And final clip. Let me. This is art writer and critic Matt Gleason featured in this this segment, this clip.
I don't have any idea. I love working on paper. The feel of the paper I like, and then the materials that I use, whatever it is. Love it. I love the director. As a child, you start using the pencil. That's one of the first writing implement that you use, and the first tool to write. Maybe that's something that is more part of the human experience. I also like the feel of the pencil sliding on the surface of the paper.
For how physical an artist is, there is a lot of brain work involved in making an art. And so he's one of those people that, you know, you could get exhausted just thinking about how to compose a painting because they're so elegant. That doesn't, you know, he doesn't just whip stuff out. There's a lot of thought. And, you know, 60 years of painting experience is all happening right there. It's exhausting. You know, when a painter of Alfredo's age makes a painting, I mean, imagine living 60 years in 5 minutes while you do something. It's 60 years. That's a lot of work, you know, even for a perfectly healthy person. Will conceptualism overtake the hand? Does the brain dictate the art to the point that the hand is no longer needed? And when we can all think, but few of us craft. And what is the role of a well-crafted art object? And what is the role of illusionistic space in an abstracted window land of reality? To his credit, Alfredo is totally on the side of great painting. And I think that will inevitably triumph in this long war of conceptualism. That what Alfredo's doing, I believe that he has history on his side.
So I just want to mention a few things about the project and where we're at. And a little bit about the journey. The film evolved over the course of 8 years, partly because of Alfredo's Guillain-Barré syndrome. It was really difficult at times to shoot with them. There was like moments where we couldn't film. As an academic and an instructor, it's really, you know, you have to divide your time between filming and teaching and producing and putting it all together. So it's been quite a journey. What I love about Alfredo's work is it feels like it's a cinematic sort of, it's very cinematic in a way. Every piece of his work looks like a frame from a scene. So you know, it really captures your imagination. They're surreal, it's intimate, it's mysterious. That's how I see his work. So again, each of his art pieces, it feels like a story. it leaves a space for viewers' imagination, just like a good film scene. That's what kind of drew me. It felt that cinematic. The collaboration, I really have to thank some of my friends and collaborators who've joined me, specifically Dave Vamos, who helped me sort of animate some of the artwork. When you're working with artists, you're trying to figure out how you could really share the power of their artwork. And so I thought about trying to animate some of his pieces, and so we brought in Dave Vamos, who helped us with that. I'm currently working with Michael J. Gonzalez, who's worked with me in the past. He's our music composer and audio, and so I appreciate him being involved in this project. And that's kind of where we're at right now. The next couple of weeks, we're going to finalize the music and the audio for the November 20th. And then I also have to thank Alonso Llosa, who I met at UCLA while we were doing film school. I've collaborated with him on various projects. Let me just sort of towards the closing. As filmmakers, we all know how hard it is to let go of a project. You always feel like there's something more to adjust. You always want to keep tweaking and changing, but finally you have to, at some point, you have to say that's it. If you ask Alfredo de Batuc, he would want to continue filming. And I just had to really let him know that we are done. No more filming. I've learned that filmmaking, much like art itself, is a process of patience, empathy, and observation. It's about capturing not just images, but Alfredo's resilience to recover his life and his art as he was trying to recover his health. So in closing, I like to see. I'd like to see the finished film. I invite you to join us on November 20th here at Cal State San Bernardino for the premiere of Lejanías y Nostalgia. And again, I just want to thank everyone for participating in this discussion and allowing us to share with you the work that we've dedicated many years of our own life and work and research and putting these things together. Thank you.
Congratulations, Professor Oregel, for completing your documentary after 8 years. I'm sure it will be warmly received at the premiere. I wish you the best of luck. And lastly, but not least, is Professor Kristi Papailler. Professor Papailler serves as the head of acting, department advisor, and a returning faculty fellow in the XReal lab. Her current research includes her lab, Motion Capture and the Future of Education, and the Black Box of the Future, in collaboration with XReal Lab, Academic Technologies, and the Departments of Theatre and Music. In addition to teaching, she maintains a prolific schedule of contributions to the field through professional performance and directing roles throughout the US. Whenever you're ready, Professor.
Thank you so much. Thank you and congratulations to all of my esteemed colleagues. It is quite an honor and a privilege to be here with you. Thank you so much, Dean Chuang, for having us here. And it's just wonderful to be your colleagues. So I'm going to do the hardest thing for me today. Is going to be to figure out how to quickly get this to go to play. Let's see. There we go. Can everybody see my screen? It should be coming up shortly. All right. Can you all see this screen? Give me a nod if you can see it. Yes. Awesome sauce. Okay. Yay. All right. So let me see. Do you want to continue to share? The work I wanted to present and talk with you about today is performance and motion capture as a multidisciplinary pedagogy. I've been really engaged in the work to bring motion capture, motion and performance capture technology and curriculum to our campus. We are currently positioned as like one of the only CSUs that are offering emotion or performance capture, right, as a basis for some of their performance classes. So motion capture, if you have seen a movie lately, you have probably seen motion capture in action. If you've seen, if you've played any kind of video games, right, you have probably used motion capture. But basically, motion capture takes the data from an actor and or an object, right, the movement data, and then it allows, then it sort of gives it a skin, right, which is the avatar. I've chosen pictures of avatar to illustrate this. And then performance capture is exactly the same thing as motion capture, except for it adds on the detail in terms of, like you'll see here, these little dots, the faint dots there on Zoe's face, right? That's when it becomes performance capture, right? Because not only am I just capturing the body's movement, now I'm able to capture facial expression. I'm able to capture like the finer movement of fingers, and I'm also able to capture and record voice data. So here, my work has been, I would say this research really has started with the Extra Lab, which is our extended realities and learning lab. And my focus has been to investigate ways in which motion capture can be used in education. So both in obviously actor and performing technician spaces, as well as like looking at what are some of the multidisciplinary approaches and applications for it. I began by looking at ways in which this is something that is useful for actors, regardless of whether or not they want to go into film. And so I'll talk a little bit more about it, but in terms of acting for the stage, the actor has three tools. We have the voice, you have your body, and you have your imagination. And one of the things that motion capture data allows us to do when we're working is it allows us to really be able to take a look at how expressive the body is, and what is the body, like what is the body saying, right? So if you say your character is in this space, okay, but is your body telling that story as well? As well as giving actors quite a an education in terms of anatomy, right? This is your instrument, and understanding how the body works and how the body works as a tool for communication. For designers, as you can imagine, there is this huge world of applications, right? One of the things I've been really looking at is, okay, so what fields become involved in motion and performance capture, right? So you obviously have, some graphic design, you have some 3D design, and most of it is quite high-tech design. And one of the lovely things about it is this isn't a field that is not going to do anything but grow, right? And perhaps it becomes a good and creative way for us to engage and stay ahead of some of these emerging technologies, as well as apply a bit of ethics to them as we're working with them, right? In terms of, how much energy are we using when we work on this particular project? As creatives, right, we're usually trying to find the cleaner way to do that. And so some of my research has also been in terms of looking at, okay, so if I use AI in order to apply a face or to apply a skin to a particular character or characters, then how much energy am I using? And is there a way for me to do this more efficiently? It's interesting to think about when you are looking at a live stream performance or live stream motion capture, that in many ways you are conserving materials. You're conserving wood, right? You're conserving steel because of the parts of the live stream that can replicate or replace, right, a set that's made out of wood and nails and steel and all these other things. So I continue to analyze the cost benefit around that, because I'm really interested in understanding, is there an even exchange there or not? Also, what is the effect on audiences when they're able to see two things? I think this research question really came about for me as part of as when we were going through the pandemic and suddenly everything was on a screen, right? And so then as we were transitioning out of the pandemic, there was this idea in terms of, like, I think really from the space of trauma-informed teaching and development and how we can adjust back to being in spaces with one another was, is there a transitory space, right? Like, what helps us move from the screen now back to being in person with one another? And also then what happens when audiences have the opportunity to choose to either focus on something that's animated or to focus on something that's live, but that are actually the same thing, just various interpretations of them. And then so all of this has culminated in creating something called the CSUSB Motion Capture Lab, but that is the working title, right? About 3 years ago, through the generous support of a VETI, or Vital and Expanding Technologies Initiative grant, we were able to purchase equipment to create our first motion capture volume. And for several years, it was housed in the basement of the library in PL 45. And since then, this year, we've been able to move the motion capture lab now into its more permanent home, which is in the Performing Arts Building in room 138. This photograph here you can see is of some of the students in the motion and performance capture class this semester, working in the space. It is still a bit under construction, but it's definitely coming along. So with this, there are also applications that I am really enjoying looking into, though they are quite outside of my field of expertise. But we have staff in our motion capture lab who continue to be able to look at these ideas. But one of the first things that occurred to me when we were thinking about developing a motion capture lab here on campus was, wow, this is also, just as we know, a wonderful way to look at movement in its purest form, right? To just be able to analyze movement, whether for prescriptive purposes, if it's gait analysis, for example, or golf swing analysis and improvement, and general study as well. And then we have history and education. One of the first projects was a project called the Inaugural Poets Project. And that was inspired by Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem for President Joe Biden. And the goal of that project was, one of the things we were able to do is we took each of the 6 inaugural poems, and students created short scenes and dramatized them that we then filmed in motion capture, and then created animated shorts, right, using the text of the poems as a bit of a product to have elementary school teachers be able to teach, right, the poem. And to be able to teach each of those poems to make it a little bit more accessible. Okay, so findings. One of the big things I'm just gonna, I think for the purposes of today's talk, I'm really just gonna focus on some of my findings in terms of actor training and movement pedagogy. So one of the things that I've been working to do in the last several years is to create really and to identify, like, what is the curriculum? What are the sort of standard training methodologies that you can apply right into motion capture training that help to develop those skills, and also, of course, like, what is my original methodology around this. And so I have found that incorporating some of the theories of viewpoint neutral mask. Stanislavski, which is not a movement pedagogy, it's more of an acting style. But one of the great things about Stanislavski is it's very goal oriented. It is very much like, okay, what is it that you want the other person to do, think, or feel? And so it deals a lot with action. So why are you moving, right? And then TAM here, and that is traditional African movement practices, Qigong and Tai Chi. And all of those practices are designed or are used in my classes, like specifically to bring a greater awareness, focus, and sort of the idea of object permanence, right? Or the ability to be able to imagine the other in the space, because often when you're working in motion or performance capture, the environment is completely imagined, right, around you. And oftentimes the person that you're talking to is also like not necessarily in the volume with you. So all of these things help to develop the immense amount of focus and imagination that is required to work in motion capture. And then Suzuki and mime are also some of the methods that I sort of call up. And then all of this is happening in dialogue with stage, film, graphic, and audio design principles. So one of the lovely things about this course is that, and in the research here, it was like, wait a minute, I think motion capture sort of as a solo art or as a solo practice became rather popular during lockdown, when companies like Rococo were able to begin creating inertial suits that relied only on motion, not optical. We have an optical system here, and we have some Rococo suits, but we use our optical system more. But that we're relying on basically the ability for, a producer to say, hey, I need you to produce this. I know you cannot come into the studio, so you are on your own. So one of the things that I think, particularly because of the newness and the dearth of training in other spaces and opportunities to apply, is that we found that it was absolutely necessary for performers in the class or for students who are enrolled in these courses to have time to both to be able to perform as well as to be able to carry out the technical aspects that are required in order to create good motion capture data, in order to design avatars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a photograph from something called the Haunted Nanny. It was one of our first live stream motion capture performances. It was a couple of Halloweens ago. And that was really put on by the players of the Papailler Garden. But in this, you can see a student here who's telling a ghost story in front of, and this is where the audience would be, right? And as he's telling the ghost story, then projected behind him was the character who he was supposed to be. And the character is moving in conjunction and simultaneously with the actor. And this is Professor Emeritus Catherine Urban, who also she was actually the first performer up in that production. So it was, that was pretty cool. Let's see. What's next? Where are we now? So again, through the generous support of the Betty Grant and in collaboration with several other departments here on the campus, we are working on working title, but perhaps like the multi-purpose room or the black box of the future. And that is like taking that space again that you saw where the motion capture is now, and we are adding in equipment. We're adding in audio equipment and visual equipment to be able to create a 360-degree immersive space, both visually and also with sound, right? And so then you have a motion capture lab with 360-degree immersive capabilities. One of the things I love about discovering how to do this is probably first the discovery that there are immersive spaces around and there are motion capture spaces, labs, right? Like around all throughout Hollywood, but there are very few that combine both. And we are certainly the only university that has it in the US to my particular knowledge. So this research then continues in terms of like developing the curriculum and what does this training program look like? How does it interact right, with other disciplines, as well as moving into, okay, what gets created in an immersive space, right? How does, how do motion capture and immersive performance go together? And so we're really working to, develop a space that can be enjoyed, but that is also, it is a classroom space as well as a space of exploration for artists and other collaborators on campus. I want to say thank you. This has been, this work has been so supported by multimedia and emerging technologies. I've been a returning faculty fellow with the XREL Lab for several years now, and we received a grant from the CSU Entertainment Alliance a couple of years ago when I first began training in motion capture performance with a man who was like one of the heads of Godzilla, no, of Gamora, I think, in the movie, but who is has been tremendously successful throughout motion capture. A man named Richard Dorton. He came and gave one of the very first workshops on campus, and he has been like absolutely instrumental in making sure that I am trained physically and very well aware of how in or out of shape I am during a given workshop during that training. But he came, and the CSUEA gave us a generous grant to be able to support that. And then, of course, the College of Arts and Letters, the Department of Theater Arts, Academic Technologies, and my co-PI for the initial motion capture lab was James Trotter, who's the director of MET. And then for this immersive project, my co-PI is James Trotter and Dr. Marty McGalvo. We could not do anything without the help of Yutong Lee, who is the motion capture lab director, and who has really been instrumental in collaborating with us in order to do that, and our lead programmer, Bobby Lauderman. Thank you.